There are Primarchs who ruled through law and architecture, Primarchs who ruled through fear and spectacle, Primarchs who ruled through reason, doctrine, and perfect plans drawn years in advance. And then there was Leman Russ, the Wolf King, the Great Wolf, the Emperor's executioner. A Primarch who did not build empires so much as end arguments. A king who wore pelts instead of laurels. A warrior who laughed loudly, drank deeply, and hid a razor-sharp mind behind a feral grin. To many of his brothers, Russ was a savage. To his enemies, he was a nightmare that howled before it struck. To the Emperor, he was the blade reserved for moments when mercy had already failed. So who was Leman Russ really? Leman Russ carefully cultivated the image of a barbarian. He boasted, he brawled, he feasted like a Fenrisian warlord, and he let remembrancers record him as a drunken savage wrapped in fur and superstition. But Russ understood something many of his brothers didn't. Perception is a weapon. By allowing others to see the beast, Russ ensured that they rarely saw the hunter. Behind the laughter was calculation, behind the rage was restraint, and behind the savage exterior was a Primarch who understood people better than most. Russ believed that strength did not come from perfect discipline or rigid chains of command. He believed it came from adaptability, from shared hardship, and from the warrior's personal commitment to survive and protect those beside them. As such, he ruled his legion as an alpha rules a pack, not through fear but through presence, through example, through proven strength. A Space Wolf did not fight for Russ because he was ordered to. He fought because Russ was there, bleeding and killing alongside him. That bond made the Space Wolves unpredictable, fiercely loyal and dangerously independent. It also made them one of the most resilient forces in the Imperium. Among all the Primarchs, Leman Russ believed himself to be the Emperor's most loyal son. Not the most beloved, not the most brilliant, but the one trusted with the ugliest truths. Russ did not worship the Emperor as a god, nor question him as a philosopher. He saw the Emperor as the Allfather, a ruler burdened with impossible decisions in an unforgiving galaxy. And Russ accepted his place in that design without hesitation. Where others hesitated at moral compromise, Russ stepped forward. Where others sought justification, Russ sought resolution. He believed that some threats could not be reasoned with, some betrayals could not be redeemed, some lessons had to be taught in blood. That belief earned him his role as the Emperor's executioner, a title Russ carried not with pride but with grim acceptance. He did not enjoy punishment, he believed in it. And often, Leman Russ stood apart from his brothers. He respected strength, but not always intellect. He admired honesty more than brilliance, and he had little patience for deception, manipulation, or pride without substance. Angron was one of the few Primarchs Russ considered his equal in raw combat, but where Russ saw fury as a tool, Angron had become a slave to it. Their clash during the Night of the Wolf was not merely a battle between legions, but a confrontation between control and abandonment. With Vulcan, Russ shared something rare among the Primarchs: genuine warmth. Both were warriors who valued craftsmanship, loyalty, and protection over conquest for its own sake. Vulcan's reforging of Russ's bolter into Scorn-Splitter was not just a gift, but a mark of respect. With Magnus the Red, however, there was only distrust. Russ despised sorcery, not out of ignorance, but out of instinct owned by experience. To Russ, psychic power was a blade without a hilt, powerful, seductive, and, inevitably, paid for in blood later. Magnus respected everything Russ feared and the Imperium was becoming. That hatred would lead to a tragedy on a planetary scale. And finally, Russ was not a distant commander directing war from a stratagem. He was the war. Alongside Angron and Vulcan, Russ was counted amongst the deadliest of the Primarchs in single combat. He fought with brutal intuition, shifting tactics mid-strike, reading his opponent not as a puzzle to solve, but as prey to be broken. He didn't duel with elegance, he did not calculate with mathematical precision. He hunted. Russ favoured overwhelming momentum, shock assaults, and brutal close quarters violence. His wars were short and decisive. He sought to shatter morale as much as armies, end resistance so completely that it never rose again. And where Primarchs conquered worlds, Russ ended them. And as such, every weapon Russ carried was chosen for purpose, not ceremony. The armour of Elavagar was more than master-crafted warplate. Its exothermic field generators leached heat and motion from the air around him, cloaking the Wolf King in an aura of killing frost. Enemies would feel the cold first, then fear, and only then the strike. Mjolnir, also known as Bale Knight, was a power sword steeped in ancient legend. Its blade darkened as it slew, as though recording every life taken. Against it, armour was meaningless and survival was temporary. And then the axe of Hellwind, forged from kraken teeth, was Russ's favoured instrument of annihilation. A single blow could shear through tank armour, and in Russ's hands it became a tool of execution rather than war. And of course, Scorn Splitter, reforged by Vulcan, stood as a rare symbol of brotherhood, a reminder that even the Wolf King was capable of respect, gratitude, and loyalty beyond his own pack. And Russ never fought alone, not truly. At his side stalked Frecky and Gary, his Hearthwolves, companions since his earliest days on Fenris. More than beast, they were extensions of Russ himself, speed and cunning, savagery and watchfulness. And then behind them stood the Wargear, his chosen warriors and champions. They weren't merely elite bodyguards though, this was the innermost circle of his pack. To serve as a Wargear meant surrendering personal glory, standing watch while others fought, and restraining fury until the Wolf King unleashed it. And when Russ gave that order, the Wargear didn't advance. They struck. A thunderbolt of ceramite pelts and blades that broke enemy elites and shattered champions in moments. Their charge wasn't a tactic, it was a sentence. Leman Russ wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He was a necessary force to the Imperium, built on compromise and bloodshed, a king who understood that loyalty sometimes demanded atrocity, and that obedience could cost a soul. And all of this started on Fenris. Leman Russ didn't grow up in a palace. He grew up on Fenris, a death world where the ground itself seemed to resent your very existence. A world of endless winters, predatory seas, volcanic firelands, and tribes that survived not through comfort, but through constant readiness to kill or be killed. When the infant Primarch was cast across the stars, it was Fenris that claimed him. He was found not by nobles or scholars, but by wolves. The legends, and we only have the legends to work with, say that he was raised by them, learning to hunt before he could speak, learning the language of teeth and motion long before words. Whether this is literal truth or Fenrisian myth hardly matters. What matters is that Russ believed it. And belief on Fenris is as binding as blood. Eventually, Russ was discovered by the tribes of men, and even among them he stood apart, larger, faster, sharper. He rose quickly, not to declare himself as king, but by surviving everything Fenris threw at him. Russ went on to unite the tribes through strength and loyalty rather than conquest. He fought their enemies, feasted at their fires, and bled alongside them. When the Emperor arrived on Fenris, he didn't find a lost son begging for answers. He found a king who already ruled. The Emperor chose not to immediately reveal the truth about himself or Russ. Instead, he tested Russ. He matched him in contests of strength, endurance, and will. They wrestled together, drank together, and debated beneath Fenrisian iron skies together. Russ did not kneel. He did not bow. He laughed, boasted, and challenged the stranger as an equal. And the Emperor allowed it. Because this was not a Primarch meant to be ruled with awe alone. When Russ finally accepted the truth of his origin, it was not destiny that convinced him, it was loyalty. The Emperor had proven himself worthy of following. Russ did not swear fealty to a god, he chose to follow a king. And when he did follow the Emperor, he found a legion that had a reputation for brutality and discipline. Gene seed instability had made them aggressive, unpredictable, and dangerously close to being deemed unviable. And Russ did not correct this. Instead, he embraced it. Under his command, the Legion was reforged not into a regimented army, but into warrior culture. Companies became great companies. Officers became jarls. Command structures bent around trust, reputation, and shared experience rather than rigid hierarchy. Where Guilliman sought order, Russ cultivated instinct. Where Dawn built walls, Russ sharpened blades. And where others enforced discipline, Russ enforced loyalty. The result was a legion that fought like no other. They adapted mid-battle, they broke formations, they ignored doctrine when it no longer applied. And they were devastatingly effective against enemies that relied on predictability or psychic dominance. The Imperium did not always like the Space Wolves, but it did need them. And during the Great Crusade, the Space Wolves were rarely sent to conquer compliant worlds. Instead, they were sent to end wars. Russ excelled in campaigns where morale had already broken, where Xenos empires resisted compliance, or where human worlds had embraced forbidden practices. His legion specialized in shock assaults, decapitation strikes, and the annihilation of leadership. They did not grind wars down, they snapped them. The howling drop pods of the Space Wolves became a symbol of terror. The enemy heard the wolves before they saw them. And by the time Russ himself had arrived, resistance was already collapsing. Russ didn't take pleasure in any of this, but he didn't apologize for it either. And then came Prospero, the tragedy that would define Leman Russ more than any victory. Magnus the Red had broken the Emperor's law, his sorcery had shattered the Webray project, and doomed terror to millennia of suffering, Russ was ordered to bring Magnus to heal. The exact nature of those orders remains contested. Some say Russ was commanded to arrest Magnus. Some say he was manipulated into believing execution was required. Some say Russ chose violence because he believed it inevitable. What is certain is this: Russ went to Prospero believing he was doing what he had to do, and the Space Wolves attacked with overwhelming force. The Thousand Suns fought back with psychic fury, bending reality itself to survive. Cities burned, libraries were reduced to ash, knowledge that can never be recovered was lost in hours. And when Russ finally confronted Magnus, it was too late. Magnus was broken, physically and spiritually. Prospero was destroyed, and Russ stood amidst the ruin, victorious in battle, but defeated in spirit. For the first time, the Wolf King doubted, and Prospero haunted Russ. He'd always believed himself the Emperor's necessary blade. But blades don't ask questions, and for the first time Russ was wondering whether he had been used, whether obedience had replaced judgment, whether loyalty without reflection was still loyalty at all. His doubt didn't soften Russ, it sharpened him. And when Horus fell to temptations of chaos, Russ was among the first to understand the scale of this betrayal, and he didn't hesitate. He gathered his legion and went straight to war. Russ confronted Horus directly, wounding him grievously on the battlefield with the spear of Russ, a blow that might have ended the Horus heresy before it truly began. But Russ hesitated. He sought to reason with his brother, to bring him back from the edge. And that moment of mercy cost the Imperium dearly, and Russ would never forgive himself for it. As the Horus heresy ended, all those years later, and the Imperium hardened into something Russ barely recognized, the Wolf King would grow restless. The age of warriors was shifting and giving way to the age of administrators. Laws would replace instinct. Bureaucracy replaced brotherhood, and Russ didn't belong in this new Imperium. And so, one day, he left. He gathered his closest companions and walked into the void, chasing a final saga. Some say he went to find a way to heal the Emperor. Others believe he hunts the enemies of mankind beyond the edge of the galaxy. All that is known is this: he hasn't returned. Yet. For most of Warhammer 40,000's history, the return of Primarchs was a thought experiment. It was interesting and entertaining. That's no longer the case. Guilliman has returned, the Lion has returned. The precedent is set. The question is no longer can Leman Russ return. The question really is, why hasn't he yet? Games Workshop doesn't bring back Primarchs at random. Each return answers a problem in the Imperium that cannot be solved with any other. Guilliman returned to stabilize a broken empire. The Lion returned to confront loyalty, secrecy, and internal fracture. Russ's return wouldn't be about administration. It would be about judgment. After all, unlike several Primarchs whose fates are ambiguous or mythologized beyond clarity, Russ's departure is purposeful. He didn't fall in battle. He didn't ascend to demonhood. He didn't vanish in disgrace. He chose to leave. Russ spoke of returning for the Wolftime, an end age where the Imperium would face a threat it could not survive through law or logistics alone. In Fenrisian belief, the Wolftime is not the apocalypse. It's the moment where old rules stop working. Does that sound familiar? The Imperium Nihilus is cut off. The Great Rift bleeds reality. Faith has replaced reason. Survival has replaced progress. The galaxy isn't collapsing in a single dramatic moment. It's fraying, and this is exactly the kind of crisis Russ was made for. Ruiter Guilliman returned as a statesman. He brought structure, reforms, a chance of survival through systems and supply chains. But Guilliman's Imperium is one held together by effort, not belief. The Lion returned as a knight-errant. He hunts the Imperium's internal monsters, traitors, fallen, secrets that fester in the dark. He's a weapon of precision and paranoia, but neither of them solves the Imperium's oldest problem. The Imperium no longer knows when to stop. It doesn't know when mercy is weakness, when bureaucracy becomes decay, when faith becomes delusion. And that's Russ's role. He's not there to rule the Imperium. He'll be there to judge it. And if Russ returns, his relationship with Guilliman will be fraught, and deliberately so. Guilliman believes in systems because systems are all that remain. Russ distrusts systems because they replace judgment. Guilliman seeks to preserve the Imperium at any cost. Russ would ask whether it still preserves preservation in its current form. It's not a rivalry necessarily, or a philosophical conflict, but Russ would challenge Guilliman's reforms not out of spite, but out of concern that the Imperium is becoming something hollow, a machine that consumes lives to maintain its own inertia. Where Guilliman asks, how do we keep this functioning? Russ would ask, what is it still for? This tension writes itself. Russ and Lion El'Jonson are natural foils. Both are hunters. Both are deeply loyal. Both were trusted with tasks others could not be allowed to know. But where the Lion internalizes guilt, Russ externalizes it. Where the Lion stalks in the shadows, Russ howls openly. If the Lion represents the Imperium's secret sins, Russ represents its open ones. Their future interactions might not be conflict-driven. They could be recognition-driven. Two warriors who know they were built for the parts of the Imperium no one else wants to acknowledge. And Russ's return would also recalibrate the traitor Primarchs. Angron is rage without restraint, Mortarion is bitterness made flesh, Magnus is consequence incarnate. Each represents a failure Russ feels personally responsible for. Prospero alone makes Magnus inevitable. The Knight of the Wolf haunts Angron. Russ returning now, older, tempered, and no longer blindly obedient, reframes these conflicts. He wouldn't confront them as an executioner. He would confront them as a brother who understands why they fell. That makes him dangerous to the Demon Primarchs in a way no other loyalist Primarch is. And Russ's return feels like it makes sense right now. From a narrative perspective, Games Workshop is deep into its shift. 40k is no longer just about an endless war, it's about consequence. Guilliman is questioning the Imperium, the Lion questions loyalty, the Emperor's divinity is openly debated. Faith and pragmatism is colliding. Russ is the Primarch who embodies consequence. His return would allow the setting to ask brutal questions without resolving them neatly. Questions about obedience, about atrocity, about whether survival justifies everything. And he wouldn't bring answers, he would force choices. And if Russ returns, it's not going to be triumphant. It'll be mythic and uncomfortable. He's not going to emerge to cheers and banners. He's going to appear where the Imperium is failing catastrophically. A broken war zone, a corrupted Space Wolves force, perhaps. A moment where no option is clean. And his return is likely going to be framed as conditional. Russ doesn't come back to stay. He comes back because something must end. And from a model and narrative perspective and standpoint, this allows Games Workshop to introduce Russ as a force of intervention rather than leadership. They can keep him mobile, legendary and rare. And it avoids replacing Guilliman or undermining existing command structures. Games Workshop can tie his presence to specific narrative events rather than permanent governance. Russ is a Primarch of moments, not eras. It's important to make a nod to the fact that the Wolftime isn't an ending. Fenrisian prophecy does not describe the Wolftime as the end of everything. It's described as the end of what came before. That distinction matters. Russ doesn't return to save the Imperium as it was. He returns to ensure something survives that's worth saving. And as for the Space Wolves, they've survived 10,000 years without their Primarch, not by preserving his image, but by arguing about it. Every great company interprets Russ differently. Some cling to tradition, some push adaptation, some hunt glory, some guard Fenris itself. And that fragmentation isn't accidental, it's the absence of their alpha. Russ's return wouldn't unify the Space Wolves through decree, it would force them to confront what they have become in his absence. Which traditions still serve survival, and which have calcified into a ritual for its own sake. And Russ isn't going to praise them unconditionally, he would test them. Jarls would be challenged, heroes would be questioned. The idea that Russ returns to simply lead the wolves as they are misunderstands him entirely. He would demand growth, because stagnation is death on Fenris. For the Space Wolves, his return is not validation, it's going to be judgment in the same way as it is for the Imperium. This means Russ is unlikely to erase the modern Space Wolves. He understands evolution, and he lived it himself. Primaris Marines and divergent doctrines, fractured great companies, all of this fits Russ's worldview more than Guilliman's. The Wolves already operate beyond the Codex orthodoxy. Russ returning does not pull them backwards. It sharpens them forward. We're likely going to see Russ encouraging flexibility between the great companies, less ceremonial division, more fluid pack-based warfare. More independent strike forces operating at the edge of the Imperial control. Not a legion restored, a hunt resumed. And on the tabletop, Russ isn't going to be a static buff engine or backline commander. He's going to be a disruptor. Narratively and mechanically, Russ makes the most sense as a Primarch who alters the flow of battle rather than dominating it outright. Rapid redeployment, countercharges, punishing overextensions. Where Guilliman rewards cohesion and planning, Russ would reward aggression with awareness, commitment without recklessness, momentum used intelligently. He'd feel dangerous to both players. I like the idea that Russ wouldn't necessarily be safe to wield. If Leman Russ does return, his datasheet will sit in the same design as Guilliman and Lion El'Jonson. A Supreme Commander, lone operative style, protection, or unconditional untargetability. He's likely to have an extremely strong melee profile, and he'll have army-wide influence, but it might not be in the form of a passive, always-on aura machine. He's going to be impactful without invalidating your choices across the rest of the army. Games Workshop have trended towards making Primarchs feel decisive but not mandatory. So Russ isn't going to be a buff battery, but he might be a problem solver. It's likely we'll see him as a mid-board bully, a countercharge monster and a tempo breaker rather than a damage calculator. Hopefully he'll bring his Hellwinter as a primary weapon with high strength, high AP, flat high damage or devastating wounds. Possibly bonus effects like against monsters, vehicles or characters. This isn't going to be a finesse weapon at all. It should feel like something that ends threats permanently. Yalnar the Blade, though, would be his secondary weapon profile, maybe a sweep option. This will give Russ flexibility, able to cleave elites or scythe infantry, and Games Workshop and 10th edition in particular have loved these dual profile designs and it works well. It'll be interesting to see what Games Workshop do with Elavagar, and this could be where Russ's flavour really lives. His armour could provide damage reduction or damage conversion maybe, potentially reactive effects when Russ is attacked. Maybe once per battle surges in resilience or movement. Importantly, the armour is going to need to feel ancient, personal and slightly unfair. And of course his custom bolt or scorn splitter, a range weapon, probably with a short range but punishing output, or maybe a situational gun that discourages charging or screening. It's not going to be his main damage source, but it should matter. It'll be his unique abilities where Russ will become Russ. I like to see ability revolving around the Wolftime. This almost feels like a certainty. Maybe a once per battle ability, granting bonuses to attacks or damage, or temporary army-wide aggression buffs for the Space Wolves, representing the moment Russ stops holding back. Powerful but brief, I would imagine. After all, the Wolftime's not permanent. Maybe an ability revolving around the Emperor's Executioner, bonus effects against characters, monsters or traitors, ignoring defensive modifiers or damage caps potentially, extra damage when targeting a unit that's already been activated. And of course there's the question of when, or perhaps why now. From a real-world narrative perspective, Russ is the logical next return. Not because he's popular, though he is. Not because the Space Wolves need it, though they would benefit. But because the setting is ready to argue with itself. 40k is moving into an era where the Imperium's contradictions are the story. Russ embodies these contradictions more clearly than any remaining loyalist Primarch. His return escalates stakes without closing doors. He doesn't fix the Imperium, instead he challenges it. And that keeps the setting alive. Leman Russ doesn't bring a final victory. He returns because something's gone too far. Something must be hunted. Something must end so something else can survive. And that's the role he's always played. The galaxy's bleeding. Faith and fear are indistinguishable. Survival is being replaced by purpose. And I think somewhere beyond the edge of the galaxy map, the Wolf King's listening. And when he returns, it's not going to be to save the Imperium as it is. Russ will return to decide what deserves to live on.